Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. I'm Key the Book Eater, and today I want to discuss the best books I've read so far in 2021. I blink a lot, I realize that when I'm recording. But the best books I've read in 2021, I am completing a 100 book challenge through Goodreads, and I am halfway through my challenge, and so now I will be discussing the books that I've read so far that I feel like they were the absolute best things since sliced bread. Let's get started. All right, Dear Ava. This book spoke to my heart. Listen, this book, Dear Ava, is a book that I will read again before the year's over. It's the story of a girl named Ava who goes to this sedity uppity prep high school, and something tragic happens to her. She wants to fit into with the in crowd, and she starts to do just that when she starts dating a football player, and something tragic happens to her at a party. Lo and behold, she had a secret admirer the entire time she was at this prep school, and she didn't know that this guy was really digging her. Let's jump forward to after the incident that happens at the party, and she's gone for a while, and then she comes back, and everyone at the school is like upset that she's back because what happened at the party, you know, filtered filtered through, and people got in trouble. And so she is not rich, everyone else at the school is, and so it's classism, there's sexism, there's violence, there's sexual assault. There's a lot happening in this book, and when I tell you this book had me up until 4 in the morning reading it, I just, it's so good. It's so good. I think everyone should read Dear Ava, no matter how old you are. Cheek itches. No matter how old you are, sorry. You should read Dear Ava. No matter how old you are, if you're 18 and older. Okay, literally, I think the author says in the book that you have to be 18, you should be 18 or older to read this book. Yeah, 18 or older, because a lot happens in this book. But when I say every age should read this book, I mean like it doesn't matter if you're like a millennial or a boomer or, you know, read this book. This book is so stinking good. I went off on a rant. Okay. The very next book is The Cost of Hope. It's thin. It's a novella. It's by an indie author, and also Issa Madden Mills is an indie author. But The Cost of Hope is a story of a slave named Sarah. And Sarah is in love with a white man in a time where it was not okay for black women and white men to be together. And he is very much in love with her. There are a lot of twists and turns. She is a slave that they say in the book lived above her station, because even though she was a slave, she had minimal labor because she was mulatto. When I say minimal labor, meaning she wasn't a field hand, but she was still working in the house as help and not being paid for her services. So a slave's a slave's a slave, but she didn't have it as bad as the field hands. But this story has a lot of twists and turns. I think this story is really good. There are a lot of people who are against stories written from the gaze of the African American slave who falls in love with a slaver. And I understand that. You know, different tropes for different folks. I just made that up. But he is not the guy in the book. The author did a fantastic job. It's by G.S. Carr, and I want to read more from her. The author did an amazing job with making it so that the white man, who the love interest, but you know he is not an actual slave holder. Like, he doesn't condone slavery. So it was because she wrote it in that way. This book is very much enjoyable, and it's called The Cost of Hope, and it's so good. It focuses on the mulatto slave. Next, I have Notorious by Minerva Spencer. There's 2 books in this series. The second one I haven't read yet, but it's called Outrageous, and it's about her friend. I will be reading that in my TBR. It's on my TBR list for the month of August. But Minerva Spencer wrote Notorious. It's a historical romance, and it focuses on a woman named Drusilla Clare, who is supposed to, she's rich, she's awkward, she's not the prettiest, and really no man wants her, and something really terrible happens to her, and because of this terrible thing that happens to her, she has to get married, and the man who helped her through this terrible ordeal, he's caught in the fire and the sparks and the gaslighting. He's caught up. Okay, his saving her impacted his life crucially. So yeah, I don't want to give too much away because what's the point of reading it if I spoil it? But it is about a woman during the time period where you're not allowed to be alone with men, and she just so happens to be alone with one, and some devastating things ensued, and the man who rescued her had to rescue her yet again, but this time for the rest of his life. Let's just put it like that. It's such a good read. If you're not into historical fiction, I think you should read this just to say, like, you know, you finished in historical fiction or historical romance. This book literally took me 3 days to finish, and it took me 3 days to finish because I was also doing grad work. So if I wasn't doing grad work, I would have finished this book in a day, 2 days flat. It is such a good book. From 1 out of 10, it's a 10. No points deducted. Same with Cost of Hope. It is a 10. Dear Ava, another 10. These are really good books. I really think you guys should check them out. Let's move on. It Ends With Us, a Colleen Hoover book. This book focuses on 3 characters. The first character is Lily. The second character is Atlas. The third character is, I forgot his name, Ryle. Ryle. And so the story focuses, it goes back and forth between present and past, and it's about a woman named Lily and a love triangle in a sense of the man she loved when she was a child, so like a teenage love versus an adult love, and one man is really not good for her because he hurts her in more ways than one, and the other lover is good for her, but she just can't let go of the love who isn't good for her. I'm trying to give you information without spoiling the book. But it's about a woman who is torn between 2 men who she absolutely loves. One is not good for her, one is good for her, but she's caught up in the feels that the first guy is, you know, giving her. And, you know, it's a book that will pull on your heartstrings, and a book that will have you yelling at the pages, and it's a book that will make you tear up. It is a happily ever after. It's a happily ever after. However, before you get to the happily ever after, you do cry for the main character, because what happens to her, what happens in her childhood, what happens in her teenage years, what happens in her adult life, you're just like, dang. You had it tough, sis. So another one, that's another 10. Moving right along, I love Christine Feehan, and this is Dark Desire. This is part of Christine Feehan's Dark series, the Carpathian series. This is the second book in the series. I've read all the way up into book 22, and now I'm rereading the series. This is the second book in the series, and it focuses on a man named Jacques, who's brother to the prince of the Carpathian people, and he is kidnapped and tortured, and he used to be really funny and lovable, and now he's tortured and broody, and yeah, it's a vampire romance, shapeshifter romance. If you are into shapeshifter romances, I definitely think you should give Christine, and vampire romances, I definitely think you should give Christine Feehan a try. She writes really, her writing is very romanticized. It's long and flowy, and all of her books are about 350 to 400 pages. I finished this in a matter of weeks, and the reason why is because with Christine Feehan books, I never just read straight through. The writing is so romanticized, right? And so much imagery that it's not the type, and not a whole lot of dialogue. There's dialogue, but not a whole lot of dialogue, right? That makes you like read the story quicker. That it, it just, I take my time and pace myself with her. So with Christine Feehan, I'll normally read a couple other books, but then I will also, throw her in the mix. So if you like vampire romance, definitely read this one. It's some hot and steamy scenes, and it's well worth it. I think this book is really great. I think her whole Dark series is really great. Next, I have Things Fall Apart. So I have a classic by Chinua Achebe. This story follows a man named Okonkwo who is hell-bent on not being like his father, Unoka. His father, Unoka, was lazy in this African village. Men are supposed to be warriors, and they're supposed to be strong and providers, and his father was anything but. And so Okonkwo wants to make sure he's nothing like his father. He doesn't want to even be thought to be compared to his father, and so he spends his whole life being as manly and as muscular. Not really muscular. He is muscular, but he spends his whole life trying to prove his manliness, and it comes off very negatively. This book is a very quick read. I read it several times because I read it in undergrad, read it in grad school, and I also taught this book to my 10th graders because I'm an English teacher, and I wanted to read this book for leisure and not for school or work, and I read it for leisure, and I enjoyed it so much. It's just so good. I mean, the imagery, the wisdom, the setting, everything about it, it's just so majestic. It's just so good, and there's a level of folklore in here as well, African folklore, West African folklore, and it's just so good. The story ends with the European settlers coming to their village and decimating their village. Yeah, it's a really good book from start to finish, from beginning to end. I think everyone should read Things Fall Apart. I have the other 2 books in the series, Era of God and No Longer at Ease, and I will listen to them while I read along with the book as soon as I get the audiobooks. But yeah, Things Fall Apart is a really good book, and I think everybody should read it at least once. Next, I have Caitlin Dare's duet, Taunt Her and Tame Him. Taunt Her is the first book in this duet. It follows Ace, a guy who moves to a town after leaving the trailer park and ends up falling in love with a girl at the new school that he goes to. But there are so many secrets in this duet. There are so many twists and turns. He wants to hurt someone and thinks that the only way to hurt that person is through her, and so he puts on the guise of, the guy who wants her, but really he's using her in order to hurt someone who he believes has wronged him. But of course, they have a happily ever after. I don't want to give too much more away than that. The second book in the series, Tame Him, she realizes the truth behind why he wanted her and why he was using her, and now, it's their relationship after she finds out the truth. I don't want to give anything away other than that, but this girl, Remy, has been through the ringer, and she's a really likable character. What kept me going was the fact that she was so likable. It's really hard to read these bully to lover romances or enemies to lover romances if the main character, if the HEA is weak. I hate reading about weak women. I need the woman can be crazy, the woman can be eccentric, she can be out there, she can be just like this, right? But I cannot stand reading about weak women because I don't really see weak women taming strong men or mean men or harsh men, and so the story really doesn't make sense when you have these really passive, meek, like agile doormat women who tame the bad guy. That's not really how it works. I'm not saying she has to be the bitch. I'm not saying that, but she has to have some type of chutzpah in her, to tame these bad guys. And so I really like that Caitlin Dare writes her lead characters that are her female leads to be strong yet endearing, right? And so it makes sense that they tame these bad boys. Next, I have another Issa Madden Mills, The Revenge Pact, and this story focuses. I love this story. The two main characters are really, really, really quirky, and it works for them. The main character is Anastasia Bailey, I forgot her name, and the guy lead is River Tate, and it's about a guy named River who's super OCD. So I loved it. He's super OCD, and he has a lot going on up here. Not crazy, but like anxiousness and like patterns and schedules and things that he has to do. And he is in love with his friend's girlfriend, and something happens between his friend and his girlfriend, which opens a door for him to weasel his little way inside and let her know why she should be with him and not the other guy. It's so much more that happens in between that, but it turns out that they've loved each other and they had a thing for each other, like love at first sight, but it was some things that got mixed up along the way, and so she ended up with the wrong guy. And at the end, you find out whether or not she ends up with the right guy or not. I don't want to spoil it, but it's a book about revenge and, getting what you want. It looks pretty thick, however. It's spaced, I can tell, at 1.5, and the words are pretty big. So you would get to this book rather quickly. I read this book in one of my 12-hour readathons that I host on Facebook every 3 months, and I have another one coming up in August, and if you guys want to participate, just comment below and I'll reach out to you and let you know when. But I read this during a readathon a couple months back, and yeah, it was a great 12-hour read. Next I have and by the way, all these books that I'm showing you, except for Chinua Achebe and Things Fall Apart and Christine Feehan's Dark Desire, all of these books are by indie authors. So please, please, please support your indie authors. I mean, come on, support. They're really... An indie author, in my opinion, is equivalent to that indie band that when you go to a show and see the main event, and then you end up liking the indie performance more than the main event. That's a lot of indie writers. I mean, don't sleep on indie writers. There are so many indie authors out here that are just so amazing. Give them a chance, okay? Endless Enchantment, another indie author. This is by Angie Daniels. This story follows a woman named Charity Rose who was very popular in high school. She hung with the it crowd. She had a best friend named Keelan who, as they got older, he became more geeky, and she was like the pretty cheerleader type girl, and they got disconnected because her friends bullied him, and her new friends bullied, in like quotation marks around friends, bullied him. Here we are 20 years later, and they are on a cruise ship for their 20-year reunion after graduating from high school. Turns out Keelan is a sexy man now, owns the cruise ship, which she doesn't know, and he's determined to get her after all these years and prove that he's the one that she needs to be with. But it ends up being a suspense and thriller because the popular girls who were tormenting everyone, pushing people into lockers, throwing toilet water on people, and all this other weird, random, nasty stuff, they start dying on the cruise ship. One at a time, these girls are getting knocked off. Dying, dying, dying. And you don't know who's doing it. Is it Keelan? Is it his friend, his cousin? You don't know until like the last chapter. So this is a really good book, and all these books can be found on Amazon. These authors did not ask me to promote them. I'm just doing it because they're really great at what they do. Next I have Yellow Wife, and this is by, I feel like I'm going to say her name wrong, Sadiqa Johnson. Miss Johnson, I'm sorry if I said your name wrong. I saw this book and immediately wanted it. I knew it focused on slavery, but I didn't know from what aspect. So this book focuses on a woman who is a mulatto slave. Okay, I can't remember Phoebe Phoebe Dolores Brown. Okay, that's her name. Her name is Phoebe Dolores Brown, and she is a mulatto slave. Her father is her slave owner, and he loves her. He actually loves her mother. He wants to be with her mother, but can't. And so he's married to, of course, a white woman, the woman of the house, but prefers, her mother. All right. And she is never treated like a slave except by the woman of the house, who despises her. Something happens to her mother, and she is actually sold into slavery. And for the first time in her life, something happens to her mother and her father. And for the first time in her life, she has to be a slave. Turns out there are mulatto women who are sold for sex, not to actually be sex slaves, instead of actually being slaves around the house. And she is sold, okay? And the man who buys her ends up loving her and marrying her, and he still owns her. Like, he makes it very clear and threatens her in every way that he can, but he wanted her as a wife, not as a slave. Although he lets her know whenever she steps out of the gate, you are my slave, okay? I own you, both as your husband and as your slave owner. There's a lot of feedback on this book, or a lot of people didn't like this book because of the whole slavery aspect, and they didn't like the main character. But I love the main character. I think you have to put yourself in the setting, and this woman was a mulatto slave, and she was a mulatto slave of her time. And if you are a slave, just think about this, okay? Because I have seen so many negative reviews for this book, and I don't get it. But if you are a slave, and if you had the opportunity to be treated at least like a human being, at least decently, would you not take advantage and be treated like a human being and decently? I mean, from 1 to 10, you're treated like a 7 compared to the white women. But that's like a 7 compared to black women, who are treated like a -10. So I get why a lot of people didn't like Phoebe's character. They felt like she was a sellout. I get where you're coming from. But if you're born in early 1800s and you are a slave, and you have the opportunity to marry a white man and live and be treated like a human being, as opposed to being whipped and starved and treated like an animal, I think Phoebe got a pass on choosing to be with the white man as opposed to the other way of living. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because there are a lot of negative reviews about this book because of Phoebe's disposition, but I feel like she played the card she was dealt, and she played a really good hand of it, right? And last but not least, My Angel. This is another indie published book by Denise Skelton. I've read this book about 3 or 4 times. This book, it's so good. This book follows Simone, Porter, and Matthew. It's an interracial romance. It follows a woman named Simone who is verbally and mentally abused by her mother. She's not thin enough. She's not, successful enough. She won't marry the man her mother wants her to marry. Her mother bullies her, and she ends up meeting Matthew after a circumstance happens. I don't want to give it away, but it's a really tragic situation that happens. And she meets Matthew, and she starts to visit him after the situation happens, help take care of him. They end up becoming friends, and then from friends to lovers. So this is a friends to lover trope. His ex wants to come back in the picture, of course, now that he has moved on. Her mother, Simone's mother, has hooked her up with a man that she swears is for him, but it turns out that man has a lot of secrets and a lot going on with him that, if only she knew, she would not want her daughter to be with him. These two are the cutest couple. It's a quick build to their romantic situation, but the author has you gushing over the fact. I thought an ant was on me. Sorry. The author has you gushing over like a touch of the arm or a caress of the cheek or her staring at his lips or into his dreamy eyes, and it's just so good. This is the perfect book to read this summer while you're sitting on your patio and like sipping lemonade and like a breeze blowing on you. Yeah, so my angel. So there we go. Those are my top picks for 2021 so far. Now that I'm halfway through my 100 book challenge, are you guys participating in a Goodreads challenge? If so, how many books do you plan on reading before the end of 2021? Have you read any of the books that I've mentioned today? If not, please check them out, especially the indie authors. They're so great, and all their books can be found on Amazon. That's where I buy all of my books from my indie authors. And yeah, I think that's it for now. Comment below if you've read any of the books and let me know what you've read in 2021 that has been life-changing, because all of these books have done something for me. I mean, they got me through some anxiety-driven nights. They've gotten me through stress. They've gotten me through a lot, okay? And I'm just so grateful to these amazing indie authors who write their hearts out for us to read. Please like and subscribe if you like this video. Comment and let me know what you're reading for the rest of 2021. And I think that's all for now. Bye.